Okay, everything looks good. I got my rag here. We'll give them a wipe and get them in the canner. And hopefully this time I will have soft beans instead of hard beans. And I know I didn't mention this, but use what beans you have, use what beans you like. I am using pinto beans because I have a ton of them. Okay, the beans are done. This is what they look like. So I'm going to get them in, get the sauce in, and get them in the oven. Welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am making baked beans, and I have actually made baked beans before several times. This is a slightly different technique for me though. I'm trying something a little different because last time I made them, actually the last couple of times, the beans came out kind of hard. So, hard beans, not fun. If you're new here, I'm Catherine, the Aerogarden homesteader, and I'm trying something different. So, last night I got my beans out, picked over them, made sure there was no rocks or bits of sand or whatever, and I put them in the pot to soak overnight. I did put in some vinegar with it. I don't know if that helps or not. Some people swear by it. I have not noticed a difference one way or the other, so maybe I have not eaten enough of them to notice a difference. Anyways, the beans are currently in my big stock pot, gently simmering away. They have been going for about 45 minutes now, and I want to get them to the soft stage. Not falling apart, but just barely, you know, like pasta, a slight bite to it, but mostly cooked. So that's where I'm heading for right now. So they've been going for about 45 minutes. I just tested one, and it had slightly more bite than I wanted, so I am going to let them go a little bit longer, but in the meantime I am going to start my sauce. Now, the recipe I am following doesn't say to cook all of this stuff beforehand, but when I make it, I always cook it beforehand, so I'm using their technique, but my recipe, if that makes sense. Okay, I'm going to get this in my Dutch oven, which is screaming hot. I'm going to let that get a little too hot. And I have some onions to cut up. So, this is the recipe I'm talking about. I kind of just, like, it's got notes on the side and changes and all kinds of things. And it's just an amalgamation of a family recipe as well as some other recipes I have given tries to over the years. So, I've kind of come up with a recipe that I like, and the technique is just not there yet. So I'm trying a different technique to see if I can get the beans to be a little bit softer in the jar. So my recipe calls for 1 onion. Their recipe calls for 3 onions, and I'm not sure what to do. I figure an extra onion won't hurt. Maybe I'll just do, that one's not good. I'll just do a couple of onions and see what it ends up being. But I like to cut my onions, or cut them pretty small, and then cook them along with the bacon. So might not end up with much onion anyways from that one. Boy. This one felt soft as well, so I'm not holding hope on, yeah, that's gross. I don't think that one made it either. Yeah. That one looks good. Yes, I do want to render out the fat from the bacon, because I will be using the fat to cook my onions. And then at that point, it'll just be like dump everything in and create the sauce, and I can taste it at that point to see how it is. Now in the past, I have sort of struggled with the amount of molasses to put in. Obviously, molasses will make the beans hard, and I think that is the problem I've been running into. I need some molasses because that's the flavor of the beans. It's part of the flavor profile, but too much and it's not pleasant. So I've been trying to find that fine line between enough molasses for the flavor profile, but not too much that it's just unpleasant to eat. I'm also, something slightly different that I'm doing this year is I am doing the beans in pint jars instead of quart jars. So I was always doing it in quart jars, and I realized after it takes me like 5 meals to eat a quart jar of beans that it's just not needed. I don't need to make a quart jar of beans. So I'm just going to make pint jars, and that way, yes, I'll have more on the pantry shelf, but it'll take me less time to eat it. So I'm going to move you over so you can see how the bacon is doing. It is rendering out. Now, if this renders out an absolute ton of fat, I will take some of it out. I can always just save it and use it for something else, but I will turn that up a bit. I probably should have cut my pieces of bacon in half the other way, so sort of this way as well, but I wasn't thinking about that. I do like smaller pieces of bacon. I have made this with a ham hock as well, so if you use a ham hock, you just put it in with your beans while it's cooking, and it'll just cook with the beans, and that gives it the flavor. And then you can just take it out and pick off any meat that's on the ham hock and use that for your bits of pork. And I know I didn't mention this, but use what beans you have, use what beans you like. I am using pinto beans because I have a ton of them. I used to use the navy beans or northern beans, but I don't buy those very often. I buy pinto beans all the time, and I buy them by like the 25-pound bag, so I always have pinto beans available. And I just started making my baked beans with pinto beans, and you know what? You can't tell. They're not that strongly flavored that you can figure it out. I'm not using like a kidney bean, which would be disgusting, but I'm using something it's got a relatively mild flavor, so the molasses is going to overpower it anyways. Okay, I am going to mix up my sauce because then once that's done and the beans are done, I'm just going to throw everything together and throw everything in the oven. So it calls for, I will link the recipe that I'm following for the technique, but this is actually my recipe's flavoring and sauce packet and all that because it's the one I like. So I need a cup of vinegar. I'm using apple cider vinegar because I have more of it, although I will put in a little bit of white vinegar. Bring it up to the cup. So it's probably like 3/4 of a cup of cider vinegar. Okay. Then need a cup of, let's see, I got notes everywhere. It's hard to figure out what I got going on here. Let's try to do these in order. Let's get the brown sugar. Okay, it calls for 3/4 of a cup of brown sugar. I need 1/4 of a cup of mustard. Okay. So I have put half a cup of this in the past, the molasses, and I wrote down it was too much. So I'm going to try doing less, and we'll just go from there. Okay, so that's probably slightly more than 1/4, but it's definitely less than 1/3. And then you can put ketchup in if you want. I am going to be using some tomato juice that I have. This is just the water I pour off of my tomatoes. I got 2 of those. I don't know how many I'm going to need. So, but this is, you can put this in, you can put in tomato sauce, crushed tomatoes, canned tomatoes, anything like that, if you want that sort of tomato component. And then, of course, it will need some salt and pepper. That is to taste. Honestly, all of this is to taste. About 1/2 teaspoon of salt, of pepper I mean. And there is bacon in there. Bacon has salt in it, so I'm probably only going to put in about 1/2 teaspoon of salt. because I can taste it later and find out, see if it needs to be adjusted at that point. That's pretty much it for the sauce. So at this point, my onions and bacon are where I would want them. I am going to go test the beans to see if they are where I want them, and then everything can just come together and go in the oven. Beans are still crunchy, so I'm going to give them a little longer. Okay, the beans are done. This is what they look like. So I'm going to get them in, get the sauce in, and get them in the oven. Okay, so it called for a 4-quart Dutch oven. I have no idea what size this is. Obviously big enough. Now it does say to make sure you keep the beans covered with liquid. So I will be checking on this as it bakes for the required amount of time. So it needs to bake for 4 hours. And then after the 4 hours, I can get it in the cans, get it in the canner. So let's see, that's one. So I will probably need more, but I'm going to add a little bit of water to it just to bring it up. I might put in some tomato sauce just to give it a little more tomato flavor, because I don't think the tomato juice on its own is going to be enough tomato flavor for what I'm used to. So I'm going to go get that and a little bit of water. The water is more to rinse the measuring cup, but also to make sure all of the beans are covered. So there's that. There you go, and then just a can of tomato sauce just to bring up the tomato flavor a little bit more. Okay. So this is going to go in the oven, 300 for 4 hours, covered. And hopefully this time I will have soft beans instead of hard beans. My beans are done. I actually let them go probably about another half hour longer in the oven. My oven temperature wasn't quite at 300. Had to put a thermometer in to figure that one out. But anyways, I am probably going to try to fill most of these jars all at once, because I do want to make sure that I'm getting a good distribution of beans and sauce to each jar. So normally I wouldn't be too concerned about it, but I do want to make sure that I'm not overpacking these and that they have enough liquid in them. Whoops. So I did end up going through and adjusting the seasonings. It required a little more salt, a little more vinegar, and then I put in a bit more mustard. I did put in a little ketchup just to give a little extra boost to the tomato flavor. More vinegar and a little more molasses. So really, this is a cooked product. Taste it. Just make sure it's the baked bean taste that you want. The stuff that I put in, the recipe I told you, that's a good guideline to start, and then you can just kind of figure out what you either know what you like, or you can figure it out from there. Okay, so this did say it was supposed to make 6 jars, and it looks like I might get 7. Let's see if we can get all of this to fit in one jar. Now, the cast iron is super hot. I've had it on the burner for the last probably 10 minutes while I was waiting for my jars to heat up, as well as while I was adjusting the spice level. Not the spice, but the flavor. So it is screaming hot, and I want to make sure I don't touch the cast iron. Okay, so I might have a little bit left over. Now the beans, they've got a bite to them. So make sure that your beans are right where you want them to be. Don't be like, oh, they'll cook more. No, they didn't cook more. Beans are exactly where I left them. Slightly hard. So it's fine, but I do want you to know that they will not soften up once the molasses is in there. Okay, so I think that one's got a little too much. Okay, so I'm going to go through, make sure my headspace is where it needs to be. I want 1 inch. I'm going to get these wiped, debubbled, and in the canner. So now my canner holds 7 of these. I'm using the Presto electric canner. I think if I was using narrow mouth jars, I might have been able to fit 1 more in. I'm not 100% sure, but I will not be able to fit another jar in. So the stuff that's in the pot here, I will either just have to eat, or well, I can't really run another load, so for 1 jar, it's not worth it. Now this was 2 pounds of beans, and so I got 7. I probably could have gotten 8 jars, honestly. 7.5 jars. So this one could probably take a little bit more, I think. There we go. Okay, well, I can enjoy some beans for dinner. But there we go, that is baked beans. Okay, everything looks good. I got my rag here. We'll give them a wipe and get them in the canner. You have lids ready to go. Okay, so when I normally can baked beans, I do 75 minutes for pints and 90 minutes for quarts. This particular recipe called for 80 minutes for pints and 95 minutes for quarts. So I don't know what the difference. I don't know what the difference is, but I'm going to do the 80 recommended minutes for that recipe, and I'll just go with it. It's not like it's going to hurt to do 5 extra minutes. This is how the baked beans turned out. They turned out really nice. They do soften up just a little bit in the jar, but they do still have, they're holding their shape. Don't go overboard on the molasses. It does intensify in the jar when it's canning. I did notice that. That's probably why I keep writing down too much molasses, and then I add more molasses for flavor, and it's too much molasses. So definitely take it easy on the molasses. I do hope you give this recipe a try. It's really nice to have this as a convenience meal over the summer and not have to worry about heating up the house. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'll have some videos up at the end that you might also enjoy, and I will see you next time on the Aerogarden Homestead.